All right, we've got a little application that has auth0 set up. In this episode, we're going to add some custom domain or subdomain routing for our Rails application. So typically when you are testing locally, we use this thing called localhost. So localhost and all domains you can actually replace with some IP address that domain would resolve to otherwise. And so in the same way that we can type localhost, we could also type 127.0.0.1. That happens to be the local IP address. That's like your loopback IP address. That is the IP address of your machine. And when we say port 3000, we're saying look for the program that's running on or that is bound to port 3000, and let's talk to that program. And so if instead of putting 127.0.0.1, we can put in localhost, right? And localhost happens to be set up as like an alias for 127.0.0.1. And so if we were to look in our, if we were to cat etc hosts, this is a hosts file that includes your local mapping between an IP address and a name. So inside here, you can say sudo vi etc hosts, and this will open up your host file so that you can edit it. You have to use sudo and enter in your root password because this host file is like, I don't know, it has higher level permissions, and so you have to like authenticate in order to edit this because you're messing around with DNS. Now, what you can do is copy a domain name in here to whatever you want and make that what your local machine should resolve as. So we could say, I don't know, boogers or something here, and then close this out. And now if we go to boogers.localhost 3000, that should theoretically, so it does resolve, but for our Rails app, we would need to go to our hosts here and say config.hosts allow boogers, and then we probably need to restart our app. And okay, so now that works on boogers 3000, right? So you can basically come up with whatever like local name you want for these hosts. But what can be kind of annoying is when you're working with localhost or boogers, these are just a single word, right? And so that might be, I don't know what it's actually called, but that's kind of like a TLD or a top level domain. But when we're working on subdomain routing, instead of having something like test.localhost, this would mean that .localhost is the top level domain. So that's going to be like our .com or .net or .org or whatever. And so then test does not become technically a subdomain. Test.localhost would be kind of like the domain or the host name. And so in order to do something like test.example.com, what we want to do is create a local domain that resolves to 127.0.0.1 that is actually like a domain that we can add subdomains to so that we can add subdomain routing. So I think if we say ns lookup lvh.me, let's see. So yeah, so this is going to come back as 127.0.0.1. I think this is actually registered, so we can use dig lvh.me. I want to say it's actually registered somewhere as a loopback address. I don't know who owns this, but yeah. You can also, you might need to like flush your DNS cache, whatever, like look around. But one of the things that can be handy is instead of using localhost, if we use lvh.me, lvh.me:3000, again, we need to like update our hosts file. Here, so we're going to go to our application. We need to update the allowed host. So this is something that Rails adds in order to protect against certain, I don't know, security things. So you can add a list of hosts in here. So we might say, you know, localhost or lvh.me or whatever. Or what you can do is you can just disable this security check completely by setting it to nil. That's like, I don't know, whatever, probably not advised, but that's what we're going to do for this demo. If you have just a small set of subdomains, then you probably want to add all of those, or a small set of domains, you want to add all of those so that you have a specific list. In the case where you're going to let users define what their domains are, though, you'll have to disable that and then add your own sort of domain checking and ownership of certain domains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So now that we've disabled that check and we are able to route to lvh.me, what we want to do is open up our routes file. And inside here, recall that we have sort of some get routes for authentication. What I want to do is add a new concept called a site. This is going to be like a website where users can sign up and then they can create their own sites, and each of those sites has its own login to the site. And so initially, I'm just going to assume that I'm the only user, and we're going to ignore logging into our dashboard or control application. And we're only going to think about, okay, let's create sites with custom domains that other users can log into. Hopefully that's clear. I don't know if it is. So consider maybe we want to be able to spin up a site for dog grooming, or we want to set up a site for childcare. We want to set up a site for this landscaping business. So let's create a model, Rails G model, and we'll call it site. And this site is going to have some subdomain. And it might also have a custom domain eventually, but let's just stick with subdomains for now. Let's also give it a name, and then we're gonna have maybe background color and a primary color. We could even have logos and whatever. But for now, let's go with this. The one other thing that I'm thinking about in the future that we're gonna want is an org for auth0. So I'm gonna add an auth0 org ID. We'll come back and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But for now, we're just going to create a site model. So Rails DB migrate. And what happens when we create a new site is we are going to use that site's subdomain as routing to see the details of the site. So for now, let's say Rails G controller sites, and we'll have an index and we'll have a show. Okay, so in the sites index, here we're just going to have a list of all the different sites. So we're going to say at sites.each do site. And for each one, we'll link to, and this link is going to go to the site dot URL. And we haven't defined that yet, so we'll need to define it. And actually, the name of it is going to be site.name or whatever. Okay. All right, /ul. And I guess we probably also want a way to create a new site. And this will be a form. Action is going to go to sites. Method is post. And we're going to have our input type is hidden for our authenticity token. And for now, we want a name. That's right. Let's actually also add bundle, add annotate. Bundle exec, annotate models. I like to see, I like to see the columns as I'm building out the inputs here. So I'm going to have an input. We'll have an input for the subdomain. Its placeholder is going to be sub.site.com or whatever. Well, just sub, sub. Or I don't know, www, whatever. That www is a special subdomain, but yeah, we'll figure it out. Okay, then we have our name, we have our background color, and a primary color, and I think that should be it. I thought is there an input type color for HTML? Let's see. Yeah, there is. Okay, let's see how that works. Color. All right, so we should be able to create a site like this. So let's go back to our routes, and we should have resources, resource resources sites, and we'll come over to /sites, and there's no method for at sites is going to be site.all for now. Okay, so this is going to give us our list of sites. Sites/new should bring us to our new form. Okay, so we have this is going to be our subdomain. So let's say test, and our name is going to be test, and that's going to be, here's our background color will be, I don't know that, and then our primary color will be some sort of like blue, and then we'll click on create site. Create doesn't exist. Site. Site.new, site params. We're going to permit the name, subdomain, background color, primary color, and I think that's it. If at site.save, redirect to at site, otherwise render new. Sure. Okay. So test, make this color, make this color, create site. Okay, now we're seeing the show page. So let's go back to our show page. And for now, we'll just say div class is style background color. Is this going to work? Site.background color. Okay. Oh no, I need to use this same brace style. So like this. Undefined method background color for nil. So we need to go back to our show, or our sites controller here. At site is, okay, so now we've got a background and we have the name of our site and the subdomain. So what I want to do now is I want to make it so that I can see this exact same content when I go to test.lvh.me, like to the root of test.lvh.me. And so let's go back into our routes. And the way that we're going to do this is using this thing called a constraint. So actually inside of these Rails routes, get is a type of constraint. Format is a type of constraint. Resources, these are all like helpers that are in order to narrow down the path or look at the request to determine which controller should be handling that request. So we can say constraint subdomain, and this is just going to be test. We'll like hard code it to the one that we just created. And here we can actually say like get or like root, and this is going to be our sites show. And we're going to say this is going to be as our like site root. Okay. So if I refresh the page here, I gotta put this one at the bottom so it doesn't match first. Okay, couldn't find a site without ID. All right, so what's happening is we are hitting the show route for our sites controller. That's great, that's exactly what we want. But instead of rendering the details for the site, what we're doing is we're trying to look it up by params ID, but there is no params ID. So we need to go back to our sites controller, and inside the show route here, we need to find it by either the params ID or by something else. So if at site.nil, at site is equal to site.find by subdomain is request.subdomain. So now if we refresh, find by, so by default, find is going to raise an exception that will cause a 404, but we don't want it to raise. We want it to just say, we want to return quietly a nil value. Okay, so now we are able to go to test.lvh.me and we can see the details for the site. So this is pretty cool. So now so like what we could do is we could put all of like any site routes or anything. If we wanted to have certain pages that are related to a site, we could nest all of those under like a site's namespace and have it just work kind of under the site path. So this is kind of the bare bones basics for setting up a subdomain routing. But you'll notice like if we go back to lvh.me sites. Oh, undefined method URL for site test. Okay, so let's go back to our site method and say def URL is going to be site root, where the subdomain is subdomain. Let's see if this works. Undefined method site root. Oh, right, because we need, yeah, let's do it inside of the view. So root or site index. So this should be, instead of site URL, we're going to say site URL for subdomain, site.subdomain. Let's see if that works. No route matches, controller site, missing, okay, site, oh, site root URL. Okay, so now we have this is our list of sites, and we have one, and we click on it, we're brought to the test.lvh.me. Let's make a new site/new, and we'll say another, and we'll give this one a darker background and a, I don't know, yellow text. Create site. Okay, here's our another site, right? And we're able to see it here under the sites to path. But if we went to just sites, we clicked on another, that's bringing us to another.lvh.me. And why are we not able to see it? That's interesting. Oh, right. Okay, so what's happening is this is the root, right? Because our subdomain constraint in our routes, this is only showing us the sites page for the test subdomain. So we need to make this a little bit more complex or more sophisticated. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the lib director. We're going to add a new thing called constraints, a directory called constraints. Constraints, and in here we'll say subdomain.rb, class, actually probably should be called subdomain constraint, class subdomain constraint. And we're going to say matches. So if it basically for these constraints, or the constraints helper method here, accepts either a hash where the key is a value that's part of the request and the value is something to match on, or you can pass this a lambda expression, or you can just pass it a class that responds, or an instance of an object that responds to the matches method. So subdomain constraint.new. So by saying subdomain constraint.new, this is going to use this instance of the subdomain constraint and call matches on it. And this will have the request. So we can say something like, okay, if the subdomain is present and the subdomain, well, no, wait, hold on. Request.subdomain, we want to see if there's a site.where subdomain, yeah. So if a site exists where the subdomain matches the subdomain in the request, then we're good. We could probably make this more sophisticated and build in some caching or something, but for now, this is fine. So now when we refresh over here for another, we might need to restart the server. I can't remember. Okay, yeah, we need to, because we created this new directory and stuff, we need to restart the server. We might also need to, right, okay, so we also need to require this file inside of our routes. So we're going to say require constraints / subdomain constraint. Okay, and then we should be able to fire this up, I think. All right, the Rails server started, and we can refresh the page. Wrong number of arguments. I guess this takes in the request. 1 given, 0 expected. I just changed it. Oh, because you know what? I think maybe it's not reloading the stuff. Okay, there we go. It was not reloading the stuff that's in that lib directory, I think. All right, so another.lvh.me. Now we can see this site. Very cool. So now we kind of like have at our top level, we have lvh.me/sites, and we can go to the test site. We can go to another site, and you could imagine building out custom pages for these based on those different colors and things. Okay, the next step here is we want to combine what we did in the last episode, setting up login and logout, so that we can support logging into one of these different sites. So maybe you can log into test, but you should not be able to log into another, or vice versa. or perhaps like I said in the beginning, right? Maybe we have a dog grooming site and that has 20 users and they all have dogs, and we have separately a landscaping site and that has 20 users, and maybe 2 of them also are in the dog grooming site, but they don't have you're not going to log in with the same login necessarily. So we want to make it possible so that people can sign up and authenticate to both of those different sites. And so this is giving us sort of like this multi-tenant solution inside of Rails. And so what we want to do is we're going to go and update our authentication or our auth0 flow so that it handles this multi-tenant auth. So we're going to do that in the next episode. But this was, hopefully this was a good primer in terms of setting up subdomain routing inside of Rails. And yeah, stay tuned. We're going to get into the next one shortly. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.